Nirasya sarva sandeham ekikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram. Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Vilashodjitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shajvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payo Rasho Muda Kedato Vande Bhagavatani Mananulavam Mudnani Patyakshito Namo Mahavaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tvishe Nama Jayatam Surato Pango Mama Mandamate Guti Matsarvasva Parambojo Radha Madana Mohano Kulari Devatamar Madana Mohan Jar Sevak Raghunatha Rup Sanatan Jaya Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Dasa Raghunath Echai Goshai Kori Charana Vandan Jaha Hoite Vignanasha Bhishta Puran Krishna Dasa Kaviraja Rasika Bhakta Maj Jai Rachilo Caitanya-caritamrta Gaura Govinda Lila Shunite Galai Shila Tahate Na Hoilo Murachita Jeva Nahi Bhuji Keva Shunite Shunite Seha Kiad Bhuta Caitanya Charit Krishna Upajibe Priti Janivera Serariti Shuni le borohoihit Shriyatam shriyatam nityam Giyatam giyatam mura Chintyatam chintyatam bhaktash Caitanya-caritamrta. So by the grace of Shri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana Prayojana Avatar Prema Purushottam Karuna Mahasagar Swanamamrita Svadan Kari Swabhavamrita Svadan Kari Somadhurjamrita Svadan Kari Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu and his beloved Parshad nourished by Sri Rup, Sri Sanatan, Sri Raghunath and Sri Jiva, one of the foremost songbirds in the inexhaustible sky of Gaura-lila, Srila Krishnadas Kaviraja Gosvami. Again, today we will continue our discussion of Sri Caitanya-caritamrta. And we find ourselves in Madhya Lila, chapter 22, which is focused on the topic of the Abhidheya Tattva. So, in the recent classes, we discussed an overview of the Jiva's Bahirmukata, or the obliviousness, or the absence of awareness of Krishna, found in the jivas that are bound within samsara, and we left off with a expression of repentance, an expression of a change of heart, and of an epiphany, if you will, for a jiva who spends so long in so many ways obeying the wicked dictates of their conditioned mind, but finally comes to have awareness of the nature of Bhagavan, the nature of the self, the nature of bhakti, and offers themselves in service to Bhagavan. So, having made that citation, today we'll proceed into discussion of why bhakti, or Krishna bhakti, is the abhidheya, and the fundamental relationship between bhakti and other sadhanas, namely karma, jnana, and yoga. So the next 15 verses or so of this chapter deal with this topic of why bhakti is the foremost abhidheya of the Shastra. And thereafter, it starts to get, from that point on, more and more practical and moves towards what it means to be a bhakta, what it is to have faith in bhakti, and then ultimately into how to practice bhakti. So that's the trajectory that the chapter is on. So I'll start today from verse 17, and in the coming section about Krishna Bhakti being the Abhideya, we'll get some review of some of the core siddhanta found in the Bhakti Sandarbha, as well as some insightful points from commentaries of Jiva Gosvami, Sridhara, and Visvanatha Cakravarti on relevant passages to this topic, which are cited here and which are also cited throughout the Sandarbhas and other works. So I've shared the draft in the box. If anyone's coming late, maybe someone else could reshare it in case it's not available. And now I will begin. So I'm starting from verse 17. Again, this is Madhya Lila, chapter 22. Krishna Bhakti Hoy Abhideya Pradhan Bhakti Mukha Nirikshaka Karma Yoga Gyan. The principal Abhideya is Krishna Bhakti. Karma, Yoga, and Jnana are observers of Bhakti's face. So this, when you say it literally, it can be a little bit hard to contextualize what it means to say that they're this figurative statement that they're observers of Krishna Bhakti's face. So I've given some explanation here. As Krishna Bhakti is an abhideya, that is a practice the Shastra enjoins for persons of a certain eligibility, so karma, yoga, and gyan are also abhideyas of the Shastra. So again, as we discussed in the previous class, the word abhideya means that which is directed, or that which is to be said, what the text has to say as far as what is the, quote, videya or kartabya, what is the thing to be done. So, as we previously discussed, every kartabya or every videya, every action that ought to be performed has a specific group that is eligible to perform it, or that it is intended for. There's nothing that's ultimately absolutely universal, because many jivas, they're not in the bodies of human beings, they can't do things that human beings can do. And among human beings, not all have the necessary education, the necessary purification of the psyche, the necessary qualities, etc., to perform different types of activities. So there is no one ultimate universal thing that everyone ought to do at the same time. Rather, there are a set of prescribed activities that are adjusted to the relative capability of individuals, because it's presupposed that the Shastra will never enjoin anything to be done by someone who doesn't have the capability to do it. To do so would be to a fault on the part of the Shastra. So if one is giving guidance, if one type of inappropriate guidance is in ordering someone to do something that they're not able or capable of doing. So it's the responsibility of the director or the teacher to assess, clearly understand the capability of the student, and then guide the student accordingly. And there's I think it's in Paradise Lost, maybe there's a quote in a line of John Milton where he says, "Doth God expect day labor light denied?" In other words, can God order someone to do something that it's impossible for them to do? No. He could. You could order someone to do it, but in the sense of would he? Or would that be appropriate? Would it be something that an all-knowing or an all-loving or an all-capable being would do? No. So there are a series of abhideyas in the Shastra. So karma is an abhideya for persons of a particular eligibility. Gyan is an abhideya for persons of a particular eligibility. Bhakti is an abhideya for persons of a particular eligibility. And we'll get into what is the eligibility or the adhikar for bhakti a little later in this chapter. But before getting into that, the main point that's being made here is that among all of these abhideyas, Krishna Bhakti or bhakti is principal, or it's the foremost abhideya. So why and in what sense is it, quote, foremost? That's what's now being discussed. So to indicate the first aspect of that foremostness of Krishna Bhakti, the second line of the payar says that karma, yoga, and gyan are, quote, observers of bhakti's face. So what does this mean? as someone who is dependent upon another and in need of the other's assistance, will look to the face of the other with the hope of securing the assistance they need from the other, so it is as though karma, yoga, and jnana look at the face of bhakti to secure bhakti's support. So this is a figurative manner of speaking which you can still find in Bengali parlance of today, where, quote, looking to someone's face is a figurative expression to indicate that you are acting in accord with what they want, or you're acting with the sense that you're dependent on the satisfaction or the approval of that person. So now in the following payar, the reasoning is given. Krishna bhakti is foremost. Jnana, karma, yoga are dependent on it. Why? Esav sadhanera atti tucha bal, Krishna bhakti vina taha dikte nare bal. All of these sadhanas have very insignificant results, and without Krishna bhakti, they are unable to grant strength. Which is a little bit of a unusual way of saying that they're unable to produce the results that they're known to produce unless they're supported by Krishna bhakti. So why is Krishna bhakti the foremost abhideya? Because every other abhideya requires the support of bhakti in order to produce the results that it does. So all the results that karma, yoga, and jnana grant are of lesser value than the results that bhakti grants. And karma, yoga, and jnana are dependent upon bhakti even to grant those lesser results. For these two reasons, Krishna bhakti was stated in the previous payar to be the principal abhideya. So in the commentary attributed to Chakravarti Pad, he makes this statement as follows. I'm just going to leave out the Sanskrit, you can see it in the footnote. I'll just refer to Sanskrit if it's specifically relevant or particular words need further elaboration, just to save time. Quote, furthermore, Krishna, that is, these two payars are stated, karma, yoga, and jnana, without Krishna bhakti, are unable to bestow their respective results. Therefore, bhakti specifically is the abhideya, this is the meaning. So, from here, two verses from the Bhagavatam are cited to substantiate this statement. And this is the pattern that we'll see throughout almost the entirety of this chapter, is a point is raised, then citations are given to support it, a further point is made, citations are given to support it, and it unfolds in a line of thought in that way. Now in this case, there's quite a number of variants on this payar, some of which have a little bit significant difference in meaning. The vast majority of variants you find on the Caitanya-caritamrta are reflective of changes in the language over time and don't have much significance in terms of the content or meaning that the text conveys. But in this case, there are a couple of variants that do slightly change the meaning. And I have to say I'm partial to one of the variants. This is one of the few cases when I don't like Radha Govindanath's reading. And I prefer another one, so I've added that as a point of reference. So the first one in particular, which has nahi instead of nare. So in that sense, the meaning becomes, without Krishna bhakti, karma, yoga, and jnana do not have the strength to grant their results. And I think that makes the point much more clear. So now we'll move to a well-known verse in the Bhagavatam from the first canto. This is from the Narada Vyas Sangbad, which is stated to show the superiority of bhakti to jnana and karma. So that is as follows. Naishkarmyam apyachutta bhavavarjitam nashobhate jnanamalam niranjanam kutapanushashvara bhadramishvarena charpitam karma yadapya karanam. Even untainting jnana of Brahman, or Naishkarmya, when devoid of bhava for achyuta, does not shine greatly. So how much less so does ever inauspicious karma not offered to Ishvara, even which, meaning when it is causeless. So this is a little bit, if you read it just as it is, it's a little bit cryptic. What does untainting refer to? What does it mean that it doesn't shine? And why is karma always inauspicious? What does it mean to say that karma is causeless? All of these things require some discussion. So the commentaries on this verse are a little bit elaborate, so I haven't given all of them just fully translated because it would make the thing quite long. So I've given a condensed condensation of Sridhar Swami and Jiva Gosvami together here. So I'll just read that as follows. In regard to jnana being described in this verse as, quote, untainting or niranjanam, Sri Jiva Gosvami Pad cites the commentary of Sri Sridhar Swami Pad on this verse, which explains the word anjana, which explains that the word anjana means that by which something is tainted. The word niranjanam thus means a remover of that is, a remover of a taint. And the taint referred to in this case is an adjunct of maya upon the jiva, that is, ignorance or avidya. So to say that jnana is untainting means that it's a remover of ignorance. It removes this taint on the jiva in form of an adjunct, which is to say the absence of awareness of its own self, or an absence of awareness of Brahman. Even though jnana is thus able to remove the taint of ignorance of Brahman, which is referred to by the word naishkarmya in this verse, that jnana, quote, does not shine greatly when it is devoid of bhava, that is, bhakti to achyuta, means that it does not lead to the state of complete unmediated, that is, direct experience, aparokshatva, of Brahman, or any other manifestation of the paratattva. That is, it does not become a means of actually attaining moksha. So here you could say a distinction is made where jnana of Brahman is untainting or purifying. In other words, it's a remover of ignorance of Brahman. But even though it's credited here as being able to remove some degree of ignorance, it nevertheless is not able to lead to actual experience of truth or reality or tat-padartha Brahman. So it can remove the absence of knowledge of it, but it can't actually enable one to directly experience Brahman. So therefore it said that it doesn't shine, quote, greatly. Means it shines, it sheds some light, it removes some darkness, it dispels some ignorance, but not fully. It doesn't lead to the actual ultimate experience. And for those who follow the Jnana Marg, their goal very much is not simply to have a theory, but to actually attain moksha, to actually experience the paratattva, what's called paratattva anubhav. So that the verse says that this won't actually work, or it won't actually lead to the attainment of moksha without bhakti or bhava for achyuta, this is very significant. This is the Bhagavatam itself saying that jnana won't lead to moksha unless it's combined with bhakti. So that's precisely what is being said here in the Caitanya-caritamrta, that jnana looks to the face of bhakti or relies upon bhakti in order to grant its result. And here it's being said in the inverse. Because it can't grant its result without bhakti, the implication is that it requires bhakti to grant it. So now, regarding the second half of the verse, I've given a citation here of Cakravarti Pad's Tika. He says, if even such jnana devoid of bhakti is fruitless, then how much more does karma not offered to Ishvara, which is inauspicious, that is, a form of suffering at the time of performance and at the time of the result, and which is aimed at engagement in further karma, or even which is causeless, that is, aimed at disengagement from further karma, that is, the attainment of jnana, not shine, that is, not become fruitful, not lead to moksha. So, as it's explained in the Gita, what is it? Sarvamapyakilam jnane parisamiyate, I'm forgetting a word there, that the ultimate culmination of karma is in jnana, or by following the purificatory process of karma, one becomes eligible and can ultimately follow then the path of Gyan. So if the path of Gyan itself won't lead to the goal without bhakti, then the preliminary process that it makes one eligible for the path of Gyan, if that's devoid of bhakti, where's that going to get you? It's definitely not going to get you to moksha if even the step that's beyond it doesn't do that. So that's the implication here. And then two types of karma are referred to. This, quote, causeless, non-causeless distinction is the distinction between what we call kamya or sakam karma and nishkam karma, desireless karma and desirous karma. So desirous karma won't get you anywhere. That will just perpetuate you within, the cycle of action and reaction. But to do action desirelessly, that can purify the psyche such that it can make one eligible for Gyan and lead to what's called nivriti, or non-further engagement in the cycle of karma, the pursuit of certain fruits and so forth. But when that causeless action or non-desirous action is not offered to Bhagavan, then it doesn't lead to, it's not a form of bhakti, and therefore it won't lead to moksha. The implication of this rhetorical question is that if the highest outcome that can be attained from karma, namely Gyan, does not result in moksha when devoid of bhakti, then what possibility is there of any form of karma devoid of bhakti ever resulting in moksha? None. Sri Jiva adds in this regard that both desirous and non-desirous karma are condemned here because of their shared characteristics of being forms of obliviousness of Bhagavan, or Vaimukya. So, whether your karma is causeless or not causeless, desirous or non-desirous, if it's not related to Bhagavan, they're both forms of Bahirmukata, or Vaimukya, which is the fundamental cause of the perpetuation of samsara. So, even though it might be selfless or non-desirous action might be privileged and praised far above desirous action within the context of samsara, within the context of the karma marg, within the context of Puranas and Mahabharata and the Vedas and all of this. Nevertheless, because it doesn't scratch the surface of significance in the absolute context, because it doesn't scratch the surface of bringing one to having awareness of absolute reality of the Paratattva, be it the Brahman aspect or the Bhagavan aspect, then it's only cycling one still within the fundamental confinement of the absence of awareness of Bhagavan, which is the fundamental deficiency, which is the cause of all suffering. So it doesn't really get anyone anywhere. So therefore, both are condemned. This is Jiva Goswami's fundamental analysis. And thus being incapable of bringing about purification of the psyche, since it is only awareness of the Paratattva in the form of Bhagavan or Brahman that purifies the psyche. So, conventionally speaking, it's considered that non-desirous action does purify the psyche. However, that is a limited notion of Chitta Shuddhi. Here, Chitta Shuddhi is being discussed in the absolute context. So, a little bit more from Chakravarti Pad. Not only is just speech fruitless when devoid of bhakti, rather, even a paroksha gyan, that is unmediated awareness of the Paratattva, which is the subject to be taught even by the speech of the Shrutis, is fruitless when devoid of bhakti. So how much more indeed is paroksha gyan, that is mediated awareness of the Paratattva, fruitless? And how much further so is desireless action, nishkam karma, that which is only a means to such paroksha gyan? And how furthermore of also is desirous action, that which is not even a means to any form of gyan. Thus, Sutta Goswami speaks this verse. So here he's giving a very nice kaimutya nyaya that spells out the whole thing. When there's no bhakti, there's no ultimate realization of Brahman, so even a paroksha gyan of Brahman is fruitless, therefore Paroksha Gyan of Brahman is fruitless, therefore the means to Paroksha Gyan of Brahman, namely Naishkam Karma, that is also fruitless, so Sakam Karma, forget about it. In this way, the verse under discussion affirms that without bhakti, Gyan does not lead to moksha, and karma does not lead to any genuine form of weal. The following citation from Srimad Bhagavatam further stresses the conclusion that neither karma, nor Gyan, nor yoga can produce beneficial results without the support of bhakti. Tapasvino dhanapara yashasvino manasvino mantrabida sumangalaha shemam nabindati vina yadarpanam tasmai subhadra shavase namo nama. Obeisance and obeisance unto he of most auspicious glory, without offering unto whom? Ascetics, the charitable, the renowned, meditators, knowers of mantras, and the well-conducted attain no weal. So this verse is cited for its comprehensiveness. It's including many categories here. Persons doing gyan, doing karma, doing yoga, doing tapasya, and subforms thereof. Here, none of them are said to attain weal without, quote, offering. So it doesn't specify offering what and to whom. Therefore, the commentator says the following, Sridhara Swami, quote, showing the fruitlessness of all the practices of those devoid of bhakti, he offers obeisance to Sri Bhagavan. Meditators refers to yogis, and the well-conducted to those of proper conduct, meaning those who follow the duties of the varnas, the ashramas, and so forth. Without offering their austerity and so forth to whom is the sense, meaning ascetics, the charitable, and so forth attain no weal unless they offer their austerity, charity, and so forth to Sri Bhagavan. The repetition of unto he of most auspicious glory, again in the verse after it was first stated in two earlier verses, is for the purpose of conveying the primacy of hearing and so forth of his glory. So that's slightly off, that last point isn't directly relevant here to what's in the Caitanya-caritamrta, but I left it in because it's nice. And Chakravarti Pad adds a little more detail. What is the use of more discussion about the importance of bhakti to Bhagavan? Without bhakti to him, the fruitless practices even of great souls, Mahatmas, are verily decried. So this is quite a strong statement. If you think about how many sages are described and how many Puranas and how many tales are there in the Mahabharata about so many extreme observers of tapasya and far-sighted rishis who taught various types of nyaya and various types of knowledge about this art and that art and all of these things. He's saying that without bhakti, even all these activities of all these Mahatmas are denounced. So, ascetics, tapasvina refers to gyanis, the charitable to karmis, the renowned to particular karmis, that is, performers of horse sacrifices, and the like. Meditators to yogis, knowers of mantras, to followers of the agamas, and the well-conducted to those of proper conduct. So here, if what we need from this praman is to show that jnana, karma, and yoga are all dependent on bhakti, then by this analysis of Chakravarti Pad, we can see that this verse in the Bhagavatam, mentioning knowers of mantras and possessors of fame and givers of charity, precisely refer to all of those categories. So we can now see that the two pramanas cited from the Bhagavatam directly support the statement made in the previous payar. So, I'll continue. Any comment or question on anything I've covered so far? I'll just give a pause in case there's anything. Oh dear.
Recording in progress.
Sorry about that. Looks like my line dropped for a second. Hopefully it's back on. Looks like my line dropped there for a second. I think it's back on. Pardon me for that. Alright, then I'm audible, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Then I will proceed. So I'm coming to Payar 21. Kevala jnana mukti dite nari bhakti vine Krishnan mukhe se mukti hoy vina jnane. Jnana alone is unable to grant mukti without bhakti. Yet that mukti is attained by one who is intent upon Krishna even without jnana. So here we find a stronger statement or a development of the theme. What we've started with is that bhakti is the principal abhideya, and jnana is dependent upon bhakti to grant moksha, and it can't grant moksha without bhakti. But guess what? Bhakti not only is the support of jnana, but it's also independently capable of granting moksha even without jnana at all. So this gives us further understanding of why bhakti is regarded as the principal abhideya. And when he says, quote, say mukti, here in the payar, then that's a hint at the mukti that's sought by jnanis, which typically we refer to as sayujya mukti. And this Krishnan mukhe, or person intent upon Krishna or aware of Krishna, refers to a bhakta. So what he wants to say is that the person who has bhakti can attain moksha even without jnana, but the person who has jnana and no bhakti can't attain moksha at all. So now we get another citation from the Bhagavatam to support this point. And this comes to us from early in the Brahma Stav, when Brahma offers his prayers and praises to Bhagavan following the Brahma Vimohan Leela, or in the conclusion of that Leela. Then this verse comes early on. It comes just after the verse Gyane Prayasamudapasya, which we discussed in the Ramananda Sangvad. So in the previous verse there, Gyane Prayasam, it's saying, give up Gyan and do Bhakti. And then following that, in this verse, the opposite is being said. If you try to do Gyan without Bhakti, in other words, if you don't follow the advice that was given a minute ago, then this is what you get. So, Brahma says as follows, Shreyas ritim bhaktim udasyate vibho klishyanti je kevala bhura labdaye tesham aso kleshala eva shishyate nanyadyatastu letushava. O Lord, for those who abandon bhakti to you, that from which there is a flow of auspiciousness, and struggle to attain awareness of oneness, only this hardship remains and nothing else, as is the case for those who thresh thick chaff. So the commentators get fairly elaborate on this one. Jiva Gosvami gives two different extended commentaries. Sanatana has two commentaries. They both build on Sridhara Swami's commentary. Cakravarti has a few of his own thoughts. So we'll go into a bit more detail on this verse, but I haven't included all the commentaries in full because just want to avoid making it too long. So when Sanatana comments on this in his commentary in Hari Bhakti Vilas, he more or less directly repeats Sridhara Swami's commentary, just adding a couple of words. So as it's always convenient to first look at Sridhara Swami and then from there see where the Goswamis go with things, we'll start with this comment of Sanatana, which is essentially the same as Sridhara's comment, and then we'll look at the further thoughts that are given on the basis of it thereafter. So, quote, without bhakti, Gyan shall certainly not succeed. So also, it shall become only suffering alone. So this is Sridhara Swami himself, straight up saying this quite directly. Without bhakti, Gyan shall certainly not succeed. So also, it shall become only suffering alone. Thus he says, Shreya, that is, he speaks this verse. Bhakti to you, that from which the flow of auspiciousness in the form of prosperity and beatitude is like cascades from a mountain lake, or that which is the true path to auspiciousness. For those who abandon that, only hardship remains. The purport is this: as there is no result for those who cast away grain, which is small in size, and thresh only chaff, which appears to have thick grains, but inside is devoid of grain, so too there is no result for those who strive for realization of oneness, but treat bhakti as insignificant. So this phrase is significant, where he says, this qualifier rather, of bhakti as Shreya Sritim, which he glosses here as that from which there is a flow of Shreya, a flow of auspiciousness, or a flow of well-being. In other words, all types of well-being are fundamentally originate in the influence of bhakti. The karma marg brings about good karma for people because of a minor support of bhakti in that process of karma. Jnana bestows moksha upon people, or here what's called apavarga, beatitude, because of the minute support of bhakti within it. So bhakti is the fundamental basis of all auspiciousness. So it can be said to be the path to auspiciousness, or it can be said to be that from which all varieties of auspiciousness unfold. And that first interpretation is privileged here because that's specifically relevant to the theme here in the Caritamrta. So now what do you do if you reject that source from which all auspiciousness comes? What do you end up with? Hardship. You end up with suffering. You end up with something that ultimately is not auspicious. This is the implication. So, commenting in further detail in his Vaishnav Toshani Tika, Sri Sanatana Pad explains that, quote, abandoning bhakti to Sri Bhagavan here refers to casting it afar with disregard, that is, completely disrespecting it. So we know that, Shankaracharya himself, in, the view of many, was a great bhakta, insofar as he wrote many stotras, he performed a lot of puja, he propagated bhakti as an integral element to the process of Gyan, or the path of Gyanamarg. And so many of the wings of the followers of Shankaracharya within the school of Advaita Vedanta, they also practice bhakti. They do so as a subsidiary aspect of their path of Gyan, but nevertheless, they, in many cases, are quite keen about the compulsoriness or the necessity of that integration with bhakti into their path. So, what's being referred to here is not just a person following the Gyanamarg and aspiring for moksha, but rather someone who wants to follow the Gyanamarg to the complete exclusion of bhakti entirely. So those who retain or integrate a secondary form of bhakti into their process of Gyan, that's not what's being referred to, and we'll get to discussion of that category a little bit later. After this whole analysis comes, we'll end up with some fine analysis of multiple groups of the mixture, but 4 types of different mixtures between karma and Gyan and what are their results. That's where, between bhakti and Gyan. 4 different results that can happen depending on which one is major or minor and what is the attitude of the performer. That's where we'll end up at the end of this whole topic. So just bear that in mind. Therefore, what Sanatana Gosvami is commenting here is that what's being referred to is not just a person pursuing moksha or Gyan as their principal object, but rather someone pursuing that and entirely disrespecting and rejecting the process of bhakti as a whole. And that bhakti being described as, quote, that from which there is a flow of auspiciousness, refers to bhakti's secondary effects of bringing about auspiciousness in the form of worldly prosperity, knowledge of the self, and moksha, in contrast to its primary effect of bringing about the pleasure of Sri Bhagavan, such that one need not seek these secondary outcomes directly, since they will automatically come about as a secondary result of pursuing the primary effect of bhakti. In other words, if you follow bhakti for the sake of bhakti, moksha will come to you. We hear statements in Rupa Goswami's Padyavali and the Caitanya-caritamrta. When you take shelter of Bhakti Devi, then personified Mukti Devi comes and falls at your feet and says, "Will you give me any seva?" So, rather than going through some laborious, dry process, excluding bhakti, trying to attain moksha, how about singing, dancing, with joy in the company of Mahaprabhu and letting Mukti Devi come and roll at your feet? I know that makes it sound a little too easy, but theoretically speaking, we can figuratively describe it as such. And Chakravarti Pad goes in that direction by adding this reference from the Nrsimha Puran to his introduction to his comment on this verse. He cites this verse which says, "When leaves, flowers, fruits, and water are indeed always attainable without requiring any purchase," and this is obviously in the olden days where there's, what do you call that? The common land around every village, and there's, flowers growing left and right, and open land for cows to graze, and, you don't have to buy everything at the shop. In that era, it was such that leaves, fruits, flowers, water, everything's free. It's just right out there. You just got to walk and go get it. That's all it requires. So when all these things are available without requiring any purchase, and the primordial Purusha, Bhagavan, is readily attainable by means of bhakti, means by means of just offering these things that all you got to do is walk 100 meters or something and collect, why is an endeavor for mukti even performed? In other words, why are you torturing yourself with all this tapasya? You could just go pick some flowers and pick some fruits and have an offering, and everything will come to you. The implied meaning of the rhetorical question in this verse is as follows. Why would anyone reject the easily practicable path of bhakti and engage in a troublesome pursuit of mukti on the path of jnana? Indeed, those who do so only struggle. That is, engage in exertion by means of observing yamas, niyamas, and so forth, and going here and there for the sake of engaging in hearing, contemplation, and meditation. And as a result of all such struggle, they attain moksha? Nope. Only hardship, kleshala eva, because they never receive Bhagavan's grace. So we'll get to that a little bit ahead, why Bhagavan's grace is also essential to any attainment of moksha, including sayuja mukti. That will come a little bit further on, but it's also mentioned here. So, susu kartam abhyayam, as it said in the Gita, this, path of bhakti is very nice to perform. It doesn't require such harshness, such coldness of heart and all of this. So why reject this and go do these much more difficult, much more dry, much more austere things, which ultimately don't work and leave you with a state of suffering? Sri Sanatana Pad adds in this regard that the result of svarga and so forth, and of purification of the psyche, chitta shuddhi and so forth, is negated by the word only. So again, if we look back at the verse, it's saying, kleshala eva. They attain only hardship, means they attain the struggle they went through while doing their austerity, and nothing beyond that. Means they didn't get svarga or some type of future pleasure, and they didn't get any type of removal of suffering in the form of purification of the psyche either. So if the fundamental prayojan of the jiva, as presented by Jiva Gosvami in the first anucheda of the Priti Sandarbha, is the attainment of happiness and the removal of suffering, then this is not working because they're not achieving, happiness in the form of worldly pleasures, they're not achieving moksha, and they're not removing their suffering either. In fact, they're actually creating suffering by subjecting themselves to all these austerities and other practices. Which is to say that those who follow the path of jnana, neglecting the path of bhakti, do not attain svarga or any other such pleasures or purification of the psyche and other forms of removal of suffering. That is, they do not even attain the results that one can attain by following the path of karma, much less the desired result for which they take up the path of gyan, namely moksha. So, following a more austere process only to get less, you could have just stuck with the path of karma and just lived your simple life, done your duty, and been peaceful. You at least would have gotten some future, pleasures, and you at least would have purified your mind to some extent. So this is quite strong analysis, but if you want some more, here Sanatana goes for a sledgehammer. And I have to say, when I read this, I was like, I couldn't believe that Sanatana said something this heavy. It's rare that Sanatana comes down really hard, but I thought this is one of the sternest remarks I can think of that I've seen him write. I found it quite interesting and, from a certain perspective, humorous as well. So he comments, if kleshala eva, only suffering is what you get, but the verse also says, na anyat, and nothing else. So that sounds redundant. If you say you only get this, you don't need to say that you don't get anything else either. If you said you get suffering and nothing else, that wouldn't be redundant. But if you say you get only suffering and nothing else, you're negating something twice, which seems redundant. So there has to be some further implication for adding this statement and nothing else. So the premise of how he makes this comment is that if it says you get only suffering, that means you don't get, any attainment of sukha and you don't get the removal of dukkha. But maybe you wanted some secondary thing at the same time. Maybe you didn't want svarga, maybe you wanted moksha, but aside from that, there might have been some secondary interest that you had. And would you get that too, maybe? So to negate even the attainment of a byproduct, then this nothing else is said. So what might that byproduct be? That's where Sanatana comes in and says the following. An objection is raised. Well, certainly at least the attainment of prestige, pratishta, or wealth will come about as a result of the exertion of yoga practice and so on, since it will impress people in society. So in other words, okay, you went and out and you became some super hardcore, austere guy, and you didn't attain moksha, and it was really austere. But at least people will worship you at the Kumbh Mela. At least they'll give you a free heater and a free spot, and you can sit there and let people take pictures of you and make you famous on the internet. At least you could be like a modern Hindu celebrity, right? You could at least get some kind of pratishta or worldly kickback from being such a hardcore ascetic. At least you'd get that, wouldn't you? So to that, Sanatana says, nothing else, na anyat. That is, nothing else will come about at all, not even that. Why not? An illustration is given as follows. As one who is mocked as a fool by people for threshing thick chaff, and only mere pain in the hands and so forth occur by smashing already thoroughly pulverized chaff, so too is the meaning. That is, so too, one who rejecting bhakti engages in the toil of the path of gyan does not attain prestige or wealth, much less moksha, but rather attains only ridicule and personal hardship. So, if the husks are already devoid of grain, and then you labor and keep on beating them, you only tire yourself and cause pain to yourself. And not only that, when people see you doing that, what do they think? They laugh at you. They think, you're stupid. You're threshing the thing that can never give you chaff. If you press, seeds that have already been pressed, you don't get any more oil. So, not what to speak of getting prestige and pratishta, you actually just end up getting embarrassed. This is what he wants to say. So, now you might say, well, what about all these, austere guys who put on their show of, holding up their arm for their whole life, or walking on fire, or standing on nails, or doing all this stuff, and they get all kinds of pratishta, and all these people are famous all over the internet in the modern day. So what are you talking about? Where is this point of Sanatana Gosvami? Then my defense of Sanatana Gosvami's remark will be a quote of Sridhara Swami from his comment on the Shruti Stuti, where he says, Agya langinam agyam agya janata sanmana sanmadam, where he refers to the plight of sannyasis who are unfit to be sannyasis. And he says, Damba nyasa mishena banchita tamam, that those persons who hypocritically take sannyas only defeat themselves. Bhogaika chintaturam, they're actually only thinking of enjoyment in the guise of appearing as a renunciate. Sumuyanam, they're deluded and they undergo the sufferings of their own yoga practices. And what more? Agyalanginam, they're actually transgressors of the order of the Shastra. Agyam, they're ignorant. And agya sammanana sanmadam, they're deluded by the honor they get from the ignorant masses. So, if Sanatan says that they get no prestige, but we see in the world that they have prestige, then what prestige is that? That's the prestige given by fools. And who wants that? Who wants to sit on a high seat and get praised by people who have no idea what's worthy of praise? Is that glory? Is that value? Never. So that's my 2 cents to defend Sanatan. And Jiva Gosvami, he has one little point on the end of this. He in the Laghu Toshani Tika, he follows Sanatan quite closely, but he drops this point that Sanatan makes here, but he adds something else, which is a little bit of a twist. So when his analysis of the threshing the chaff analogy goes like this, that in the case of someone threshing thick chaff, not only does pain throughout the body as a result of the hard labor occur for a person doing the threshing, but the pummeling of the ears of others also occurs. In other words, in Sanatan's analysis, you pain yourself by doing this process and you end up looking like a fool. And in Jiva Goswami's analysis, you pain yourself and you end up just annoying people by making all this noise for no reason. So the implication being that trying to follow the path of Gyan, rejecting bhakti, not only ultimately causes oneself hardship, but also creates a nuisance for others in society as well. Okay, I'll just finish this point and we'll conclude for today. Lastly, Sri Sanatan Pad states that the compulsory worshipability of Sri Bhagavan is indicated by the address, Vibho, O Lord, in the verse, and that the implied meaning is that those who ignore this sink into a hellish condition. And we'll get to more on that in a couple of verses ahead. Sri Jiva Pad in his commentary also cites this verse, that needs to be fixed. The following verse, it's okay, sorry. Sri Jiva Pad in his commentary on this verse cites Srimad Bhagavatam 81:19 in this regard. Quote, the root of all siddhis, or all types of attainment, is worship of his feet. The implied meaning being that because worship of Sri Bhagavan is the basis of all types of siddhi, all types of attainment, when that worship is rejected, then there will be no acquisition of any form of siddhi, be it moksha, svarga, or otherwise. So, in this way, this statement makes it clear that for those who reject the path of bhakti, there will be no attainment of moksha, and there'll be a hard road along the way of trying to achieve it without it. So after this, we get a citation from the Gita, which furthers the reasoning given here about why bhakti is necessary to attain moksha. We'll get to that in the next class. I'll avoid going over time. So I'll conclude here. If anyone has comments, corrections, questions, or feedback of any other type, please feel free to share. Yes, I see a hand.
Jai Radheshyam, Prabhu, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate very much the class. It's the first time I hear it, but anyway, it's very, very nice. so many details I can understand. But I have a question. It's about recently Babaji answered to a question that Bhakti-lata Bij is given by the guru when imparting knowledge to the students. So Shraddha in the Shastra is then growing. So that means that what I understood, that the Bhakti-lata Bij actually is the Shraddha in the Shastra. So Bhakti is said to be independent. But in this previous statement, it seems that Bhakti depends of the endeavor that the student can give to Jnana, then the study on and a steady Shraddha in the Shastra. So can you please give an explanation to my understanding? I hope you understood my question.
I didn't fully understand. You were saying the Bhakti-lata Bij is granted by the Guru, and what was after that?
And yes, it's granted by the Guru. Actually, Bhakti-lata Bij sold by the Guru means that actually the Shraddha in the Shastra is increasing. And so the Bhakti can, what I understood, the Bhakti can be developed through the Jnana, and particularly through the Shraddha of the Shastra.
Okay.
You see what my point? Actually, it was the point of Babaji. It was said that actually the Bhakti-lata Bij is given when the Shraddha in the Shastra is given. Is it actually something that is substantial?
I'm still finding it a little bit harder to grasp exactly what you're saying. But I'll just comment in general that the pyre itself says Brahmanda Brahmite Kono Bhagyavan Jeev Guru Krishna Prasade Pai Bhakti-lata Bij, that the Jiva gets by the grace of the Guru and Krishna this seed of the vine or the creeper of bhakti. And then after it says by Shravan and Kirtan, the seed is watered and it grows. So Shravan, Kirtan, by hearing, by studying, by learning from the Guru, then that seed will mature, that plant will grow, that bhakti will flourish. This is the basic idea. So, what exactly are you asking beyond that?
Yes, I understand better now. I understand that actually the Bhakti-lata Bij, which is given previously during the initiation, can grow with the growing of the Shraddha in the Shastra and the Shraddha even of the Guru through the chanting and the Shravanam, Kirtanam. Isn't it?
Sure.
Yes, but originally, because the student was asking, what is actually the form of Bhakti-lata Bij? What is the representation of the Bhakti-lata Bij? And so at this question, Babaji answered that Bhakti-lata Bij is the Shastra, the Shraddha in the Shastra.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know if you see my point, but it is a question that what is finally the relationship between the Bhakti-lata Bij and the Shraddha?
Well, I mean, you're already saying what you've heard from Babaji about it, so you can understand it like that.
Okay.
We covered these payars some time ago in our Caitanya-caritamrta classes. I've also offered some extended discussion of the topic, so you might like to consider the way it's explained there. You could look up those recordings if you're interested.
Yes, I will check. Thank you.
Sure. All right, well, I assume that's it for tonight. So we'll pause here. And now that the semester is back in session, then we'll plan to be back next week and proceed further with our discussion here of the Sanatana Shiksha. So, Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe Shyam.
Radhe Shyam, thank you.
What to do?